started out when I was about 18. I would be very exhausted, depressed, anxiety, shin splints, and I really started noticing it when I got pregnant with my son. It progressively got worse. When I would stand, my blood pressure would drop, and I was very nauseous and again exhausted. I would get these blackouts where I would just be walking and I couldn't see anything. And so it slowly progressed more and more, and I really started noticing like I really needed to go to the doctor. And so I had this family doctor that I would go to, and I would go to him regularly and tell him like, well, at first I went there and he did some general tests on me, just to see my general wellness, because I was complaining about my exhaustion and stuff like that. And so he did some general tests and all the blood work came back fine. And I just wasn't convinced there wasn't something wrong with me, because I could feel that there was. And so basically I just kept going back every couple of weeks, and I would read up on things that it could be, and I would ask him to test me for those things, and then he would test me for them, and the results would come back negative. And it just got to a point where, you know, he didn't want to help me. He didn't think there was anything wrong with me. And I was labeled as a hypochondriac. And so he ended up sending me for a test for epilepsy. He sent me to a neurologist because my grandmother had that. And of course, that came back negative. So then he ended up sending me to an endocrinologist. He was just taking shots in the dark, trying to figure out if there was actually something wrong with me. And so he sent me to this endocrinologist who did a bunch of tests on me, and basically, like, he didn't really see any major signs of anything he could help me with. But then, kind of as a last-ditch effort, he said, well, let me try one more thing. And so he ended up asking me to stand up, lay down, sit down, and he would take my blood pressure for each one. And he noticed when I stood, my blood pressure would drop, which was when I was having most of the difficulties, is when I was standing and trying to be active. And so he ended up sending me for this test that he said he was testing me for Addison's disease to see if my adrenals were functioning properly. And so he sent me for this 2-hour test. And when I got the results back, he said that I was basically borderline Addison's disease. So he said, you know, take these steroids, take Cortef, and then see how you feel. And he said, and get a medical alert bracelet, because if anything happens, you know, you want to make sure you have this bracelet. And so I left not really knowing a whole lot of what was going on, but it explained some of the muscle fatigue and things like that. And so a few weeks later, I actually got the flu, and I almost died. At each time I would throw up, I would feel weaker and weaker and weaker, and I got to the point where my husband's like, we're going to the hospital. And so he took me to the hospital, and he tried to explain to them, this is an emergency. Like, at this point, I couldn't hardly stand or walk or anything. And they made me wait, just like everybody else. They didn't really understand the disease. They didn't know what was wrong. And I ended up going to the bathroom. They had made me, I think at this point I had been waiting 3 hours. And I went to try to go to the bathroom, and when I didn't come back, my husband went to find me, and I was on the floor, and I couldn't talk or move. And, you know, it was pretty scary for him, and I just remember going through all these hallways and everything, and they were saying things like, she's going to go into cardiac arrest. What's wrong with her? Like, they didn't even know what was going on. And James, like, my husband couldn't remember, because I'd been so early diagnosed, he didn't really know a lot yet about it. And so I ended up somehow saying Cortef or something, and he's like, Cortef, that's the steroid she's supposed to be taking. And so at this point, like, I was, like I said, I was like, my wrists would like seize up like this, and I would be like curled all up in a ball, and I couldn't like move or anything, but I could hear everything around me, and they're getting the things all ready in case I had a heart attack or something happened. And but then when they gave me this steroid, I came right back around again. And so I went through this numerous times in my life where, at least 10 times I almost died because of lack of being treated when I was told, where we told them it was an emergency and that I needed to be seen. And I even got a doctor's note from my endocrinologist stating all of the emergency procedures that the doctors were to follow, and they would still make me wait until I was in critical condition. And sometimes, most times, I would actually go in there for the flu, and because of not being medicated and treated right away, I would be sick for weeks on end, on bed rest. I couldn't do anything. And it was just because it went too far. And so, I just got to a point where, I was terrified. They were like, is this time, am I going to die? Are they going to not medicate me? And so it was a very scary thing to be around anyone that was sick. Basically, my body would just shut down. And the more I got sick, the more it would shut down. And so I started doing things like I would try drinking Pepto-Bismol so I wouldn't be sick. And then I actually got a hold of one medication that's like Gravol. It's just a more expensive version. And I would pop those pills, or I would take Tums, and I'd make sure I had lots of electrolytes. And I would do all these things to try to prevent this stress of going into this hospital not knowing, is this going to be the time that's going to be the end for me? And so I continued to not be well. Some of the events that happened during this time is I was in a few car accidents also, and I had several injuries from the impact of the accidents. And so I had a lot of injuries to my neck and my shoulders and my back and stuff like that. And so I suffered a lot of inflammation from that. But I just really felt like there was things going on in my body, and I needed to know what was wrong. And so I just kept asking anyone that I could talk to, anyone that would listen to me, and anyone that knew even a little bit about anything natural. Then I would talk to them and just try to get any sort of advice. And I remember there was a lady at church, and she owned a health food store, and she said, why don't you go see Dr. Trezart? He's a natural doctor in Edmonton. And she said, and he does all these tests, and he does blood analysis, and he does this, and he does that, and he checks your vitamins. And so I ended up going to him. He was my first introduction to natural medicine. And he was a very good doctor. He was very educational. He showed me how to read blood work and vitamins levels and stuff like that. And he actually, he showed me, I was actually in really bad condition for my vitamins. My hormone levels were in the negatives. He suspected I had a lot of food allergies then, but I couldn't afford the testing. But he said, you need to take some of these supplements. And he showed me, I was at the low end of the scale for a lot of things that were really important that I needed in my body. And so he showed me what that looks like, if you have these numbers that are given to you. And if you're at the bottom end, that's not good. You don't want to be at the bottom. You want to sort of be in the middle. And so I learned that from him. And I actually, when I had moved to Alberta, I had got I hired a new endocrinologist because I wasn't feeling well. And so I had gone to her and told her about my blood pressure not being good and stuff like that when I would stand and do things, even on the medication. And she introduced me into another medicine, which was Florinef, which she says, the steroids actually cause your water and your salt to be imbalanced and your blood pressure to drop. Those are all symptoms and side effects of these drugs. And so we put you on this Florinef, and that should boost you up. And anytime you have to work out or during the summer, you take double. And so that's, on my way I went, and it did help. But, through the process of all these things, I was becoming quite overweight, and I hated myself. And, I couldn't keep up with my working out. I kept trying to work out, and I just couldn't work out. And so I kept trying to figure out different ways to lose weight, different ways to be healthy and stuff like that. And I came across this diet, and basically I was cutting out the carbs and the sugars and all these things, and I was eating some of these packaged foods that this place had given me, and for the first time in years, I actually lost weight. And so I think I was about 230 pounds, and I'd gone down to like 160 or something like that. And so I ended up going into my endocrinologist, and she said, "What is wrong with you? You have lost so much weight. Whatever you're doing, stop it. You need to go back to doing what you were doing." And I proceeded to tell her that I had done this diet, and she said, "No, you need to continue doing what you're doing. And I want you to be overweight, and this is a normal part of life when you're on these drugs, and you can't start losing weight like that. It's not healthy." And I knew then, I was like, I don't want to see you anymore. So I ended up leaving there, and I went back to one of my natural doctors that I had talked to, and he generally doesn't refer anybody, but I begged him. I said, "I need you to recommend an endocrinologist for me, because this endocrinologist I have, they're not helping me, and I need to get better." And so he ended up pointing me in the direction of an endocrinologist who is more of a natural-based endocrinologist. And so I went to see him, and he did everything in his power to help me. And so he ended up he listened to everything I said, and he agreed with me that these things were horrible, that I'm on the medication, this happens, and he says he sees this all the time. And so he just kind of like sent me for different tests just to get his own blood work done. And he came back and found, okay, like, I don't know what's going on, because your adrenal glands they're not functioning normally. And so he had done this test for me, and in the hospital, and he explained to me, this basically it's not a big deal, but we keep you in the hospital in case anything happens. And so he was checking to see how my pituitary was reacting to stress, and is it reacting, and how much, and when, and that sort of thing. And so he gave me this sugar drink, very similar to the diabetes drink. And so I drank that, and they would kept checking my blood and monitoring my sugars and stuff like that. And he's talking to me the whole while through, or one of the doctors was, I don't think he was. And then I slowly started to not even know where I was, and I was slipping out of consciousness. And so they very quickly recognized that, and gave me a big, huge dose of sugar and food and all of these things, and I was basically going into a coma. And I can't remember which way it went, but my glucose either hit the roof or whatever, and my insulin dropped. I think it was my insulin. It went below 2. And so he knew right there's something happening here. And so he continued to do further testing, and he ended up sending me to an environmental specialist. And that was sort of the closest I had gotten at this point. And the environmental specialist basically said, well, you have lots of toxins, you have this, you have that could potentially be there. But it was going to cost a lot of money to work with him, and I didn't have the money at the time. And he couldn't tell me for sure he was going to fix me. He just said, I suspect this and suspect that. And so I ended up leaving there, and I thought, well, if he can figure this out, why can't I? And so I just started educating myself, and I just figured, like, I have to figure this out, because I know that there's something wrong, and I need to fix it. I don't want to cover it up anymore with this medication, because it's clearly not working. And like the struggles went on. Like when I would go to clean, for example, I love to clean. When I would go to clean, I would be exhausted. Like I would literally do the dishes and I'd have to lay down, and I would vacuum and I would have to lay down, and like after every event, every little thing I did, I would have to lay down. And it's like I spent most of my life laying down at that point. And my kids were doing everything for themselves. Like I couldn't even take care of them properly. Couldn't play with them or do anything like that. And so anyway, I ended up, I just continued to struggle, and I was getting more and more symptoms. They would test me continuously for diabetes, thyroid. I went to my new family doctor in Alberta here, and she was very helpful. She tried everything she could. She did a ton of tests. I would, with her as well, bring in things for her to test me for, and quite often she didn't even know what they were, and they didn't do those tests. And so I just continued to do this research, and she did some of these tests, and it came up. One of the tests, she just did this random autoimmune test just to see what would happen, and it turned out that I had one of these 5 autoimmune diseases that turned up, and it said retest in 6 months. And so I said, well, which autoimmune disease I have? And she's like, well, I don't know. And she suspected maybe lupus. But my sugars would always be good, my thyroid was always good. Like they would test everything, and it was fine. And in fact, with the sugars, I would generally react better than the average person for drinking the sugar drink. And so, but then, she then started to get a little worried, and she ended up sending me for these tests because I had a lot of symptoms of pancreatic cancer. And so I literally went home and cried for 2 weeks, thinking that, I have to spend every day I can with my children because maybe I have this pancreatic cancer. And what was that going to look like? And so, it was just all of these things that they just kept saying. Like, whenever they did come up with something, it was like this other drug or this other thing, and I was struggling a lot with getting the things done that I needed to get done, and I couldn't enjoy life. I was always an outdoor person that loved life, and I loved to garden, and I loved to work out and be in shape, and I hated myself. I hated how fat I was. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. I was so depressed. And I couldn't be the mother I wanted to be. And I couldn't hike, I couldn't bike, I couldn't do anything. And I would often miss church, which was killing me because I felt like it was such a failure to my family, because I often didn't go and other people wouldn't want to go because I wasn't there. And it was really hard. I really believe I did a lot of woe is me also. I think we all do that when we're sick. And, it's hard to reach beyond to help others when you feel like you can't even survive life yourself. And so one Sunday I got up and I was sick and I was depressed, and I just didn't feel like I had enough energy to go to church. And so this time, instead of praying and saying, Heavenly Father, why me, why this, why can't it be better? Instead of that, I said, Heavenly Father, I know you can help me. I can't do this anymore. I need to be better, and I don't know how, but I know you can help me, and I know I can get better. And while crying through this prayer, I felt very strongly that I was going to be healed. I was going to figure it out and get better. And it was so crystal clear to me. And so from that day on, I swear every time I wanted to learn something, I put the effort in. I did the studying. I figured stuff out. Things would just pop up. Like one of the first things that popped up was Dr. Axe. I had been praying, but I could just figure out the source, just one of the sources of my sickness, because I knew food was something. I knew there were different triggers that were causing me problems. I knew my pain, it wasn't helping. So I just started, I would pray for things, and then they'd pop up. And so this Dr. Axe, he popped up. I didn't know who he was. I'm scrolling through my Facebook, and it pops up Leaky Gut. So I watch this video, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is me. This totally describes my gut. This has totally got to be one of my problems. And so I ordered his bone broth, and I started trying to do all the things that he was suggesting for leaky gut and stuff like that, and it was helping. It really was. And I started to have less pain in my joints and things like that. And so yeah, I would just go from thing to thing, and every time I would pray, that person, or if I get a phone call or something. One of my issues was emotionally. I had a lot of things. Everybody has baggage in their life. Well, I had some baggage too, and I had things from when I was a kid and growing up, and different people in my life and things like that bothered me mentally. I had these troubles and these trials, and so I went to a psychologist in my church, and actually it was kind of funny because he said, well, you don't really have anything wrong with you, Tracy, to be coming here, and you really, after a few visits, he said, you really don't need to come here. And I said, well, you know what, I have this list that I made, and I said, and I want to come to you every few weeks until I've crossed off this list. And so I did, and it made a world of difference. And so anyway, I went through these different steps and kept getting closer and closer and finding more and more things. And I started, videos would pop up in my Facebook, and I had been praying because I had learned so much, because 2 or 3 years had passed of me doing all of these different things, and I knew I was having success at it, but I needed a doctor that could do these final tests for me to figure out the last little bit, to figure out what else I needed, what am I missing. And so sure enough, I'm on my Facebook, and I pull up Autoimmune Secrets, and so this doctor comes on, and as soon as I saw him, I got chills down my spine, and I started to cry. And I knew he's a doctor. He helped me thrust it out. And there was the doubt in my mind, because everything I found was through prayer and through me being diligent, studying and learning and educating myself and not giving up. I wasn't willing to give up. I started to be sick when I'm 18, and here I was at this point where I'm like, I'm not doing this the rest of my life. And so I phoned this doctor and got an appointment with him. And I also went to see my endocrinologist. And because I started noticing that I would sometimes forget to take my pills. And when I would take them, one of the recent side effects or symptoms I was getting was this racing heart. And it didn't matter if I was drinking water, it didn't matter what I had. I had this racing heart. And they tested me for everything, like sleep apnea. They asked if I was a smoker and a drinker, and they did this heart test, and they were doing all these things, and nothing came up, of course. And so I went to the endocrinologist, and I told him what had been going on, and he said, and I had food allergy tests done at this point and things like that, so I knew a few allergies I had and stuff. And so he said, what do you think could be causing it? Do you have food allergies? And I laughed. And so there was potato starch and cornstarch in my medication. And so right away he wanted to do some more tests again. And so he did. And he found out that my adrenal glands were somewhat functioning again. And so I ended up going off to Texas, to Sugar Land, Texas, to have an appointment with Dr. Peter Osborne. And my whole family went up there. We went up there for a big vacation with the intentions of me going to visit this doctor. And so when I went in there, just like I knew, like he knew, it wasn't like, let me do these tests. It was like he knew he could help me. And I knew he could help me. And so he did numerous tests on me. He found metal toxicity, mold poisoning, mycotoxins, which were in my home. I later had mold tests done. There was mycotoxins. I had a lot of vitamin deficiencies, and they were all main ones that you need to function your adrenal glands, and main ones that you need to run your immune system. They were very, very low. And I had a mild candida, and I had there was just a whole bunch of problems going on. But a lot of the things I already knew because of the studying I'd already done, but I needed these tests done because I wanted to make sure if I'm paying money, they're being done properly and they're accurate tests and stuff like that. And so he put me on a diet, and a special diet to get rid of some of these things, and different, like a mold binder to get rid of the molds and things like that. He did this gluten genetic testing as well. And that was huge for me because I knew foods were linked, but I didn't really understand why. And so he did this gluten genetic testing, and I had 3 out of the 4 markers. And so, which meant for me, it wasn't just wheat, barley, and rye. It wasn't just gluten. It's anything that my body recognizes like gluten, like casein that's in dairy, even certain foods like peppers, tomatoes. There's different foods that were found to be very hard to digest with people that have these gluten issues. And so he immediately gave me his book, and he gave me a list. And he has a book, No Grain, No Pain. And he gave me a list of things that I shouldn't be eating, and put me on a whole bunch of supplements, and explained to me that if I don't have enough supplements that I need, I can't possibly heal. So I was sort of already in the healing stage, but I wasn't giving myself the exact things I needed, and I still had some toxicity that I had to get rid of first, one of them being the mold. And so, yeah, so I'm definitely still on a journey. I'm definitely still not completely well. I have a little ways to go. But you know what? It's been over a year now that I've been off my steroids. There was when I was up in Texas, I sort of missed this part of the story, but when I was up in Texas, Dr. Osborne didn't feel that I had symptoms of Addison's disease, and so that was one of the tests he ran on me to check my adrenal glands. And when I had left him, I had to do these tests for him, which meant I had to be off my steroids for 12 hours. And for me, that was like devastation. I was terrified. I'm in the States. You're telling me to not take my medication, and I'm told if I don't take, I'll die. And he didn't force me by any means. He just said, he asked me if I ever considered not taking them. And I just had to not take them for those 12 hours. And so anyway, when I did the test, I didn't take them. And I forgot to take them. So I ended up not taking them for almost 24 hours. And when I realized it, I said to my husband, I didn't take my pills. And I feel fine. And he's like, yeah. like, you should have tried that a while ago, maybe. I don't know. But, and so anyway, my endocrinologist ended up calling me when I was driving down the highway in Texas. And he said, do you have a minute? I have those test results that you did for me before you left. And I said, sure. And he said, those tests came back normal, Tracy. And he said, you don't need the steroids. And he said, I have to do one more test, but your adrenals are working. I don't know what you've done. And he goes, I've never seen this happen before, but by the things you've been doing, like the different change in exercise and the foods and all those things will definitely play a part. And he said, we have to do this one more test, but he said, you know, everything looks good. And I cried. I had my sunglasses on in the car, and I cried and cried. And I knew my prayers were answered, but I knew it was because I did the work to figure it out. I didn't just take, you're going to be fat the rest of your life, just take these pills and figure out how to adjust to it. I didn't accept that. And that was a really important part of my journey, is not giving up and not just believing anyone. Even my doctor to this day, who I love dearly, Dr. Osborne, when he gives me things, I read everything. I research everything. And it's just who I am. This is my body, and it's our life, and we need to know what we're putting in our mouth. We need to know what we're doing here. And so anyway, I've been off the steroids for it was a year actually, last April. So, and I had the flu actually not too long after I got off the steroids, and I didn't have to go to the hospital. So I'm definitely on the road to recovery. It's a big adjustment with my diet, but my 90% of my problem was the food. And so, you know, when people tell you the food doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter if it's organic, and it doesn't matter if it's a small allergy and you have just a little bit, it matters. At least it did for me. And so, anyway, I want to share this journey that I've been on with you. I want people to have hope. I've currently been studying to be a naturopath as well, and I want to gain more knowledge so that I can help more people to get well and to just point people in the right direction. So I hope you enjoyed my story, and I hope you won't ever give up. For those that, if you know people that are sick, or if you know, if you're sick and you've been struggling, I'm going to be posting videos and recipes, and I'm going to be posting down in the link below. There's going to be things you will be able to click on for vitamins and supplements that I've used myself personally that have helped me. And I'm going to be, just all the time making videos for just to give you guys some information of what I've learned on my journey, and I hope that you will take the time to watch them if you're interested, and I pray that you'll all be able to make your journey as well.